Testing. Not sure where to stand, but I'll come over here next to the boss. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to start by acknowledging that today we meet on the traditional lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge particularly any First Nations people with us today, and also to acknowledge what a difficult week this is, what a difficult time this is, particularly for our First Nations brothers and sisters, and just ask everyone if we can all try and be kind to each other as we have this conversation today. I'll pass over to Priscilla now, who's going to say some thanks as well.
So I'd like to welcome and acknowledge the individual and collective contributions of those with lived and living experience of mental health issues, mental distress and suicidality, as well as the family, kin and carers of people with lived experience of mental health issues. Your insights, advocacy and allyship to influence positive change in the mental health system is vital for the human rights of us all. Nothing about us without us.
Thank you, Priscilla. And I should have introduced myself, but I'll do that now. My name's Leanne Smith. I'm the Chief Executive at the Australian Human Rights Commission. And it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you all here today to our offices. And for us to be collaborating with Priscilla, who I know from a different context, in the context of Mental Health Day. So thank you so much, Priscilla, and to your team at Being for inviting our commission to be part of this conversation. And I'd also like to send a thank you to our own dear colleagues, our disability discrimination team, and particularly to Basma and Donna, who I think are here for helping to pull together the actual event today. As most of you would know, the theme for this year is mental health is a universal human right. For me, human rights are essentially about respect and about dignity. And some of the most challenging issues in mental health today in Australia and around the world are actually human rights issues, and we need to start thinking about them that way. In the delivery of mental health services, these deprivations include the use of seclusion and restraint, involuntary treatments, and deprivations of liberty. Inversely, we see from contemporary events in Australia, but also around the world, that what kind of trauma and mental distress are caused by human rights violations in different contexts. And in this, the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I wanted to start today with the simple but mighty proposition that's found in Article 1 of that very important declaration, and the declaration that guides our work here at the Commission, which states that all human beings are born equal in dignity and rights. It's aspirational, but I think it's something that we need to hang on to. No matter who an individual is, what they think or what they believe, or which systems they're receiving services from, they are all born equal in dignity and rights. So today we're having a Fishbowl event. I've never been involved in a Fishbowl event before. I don't know if any of you have, but it sounds very exciting. So we're going to try out this innovative format. It's new for us at the Commission, I think. And as an alternative to the usual question and answer format, this means that the Commission and Being mental health consumers are co-hosting the session to open space for some of the issues that you want to talk about. So I think what this means is that we're going to have as many audience members as are interested and as possible participating in the discussion, and removing the hierarchies of having the experts at the front and the audience sitting where you are. So I hope that it works and creates a really lovely space for conversation. But to start off this conversation today, we have with us Professor Emeritus Rosalind Croucher AM, our own president, and also acting Disability Discrimination Commissioner at the Australian Human Rights Commission. Jenna Roberts, Deputy Commissioner at the New South Wales Mental Health Commission. Chris Grumley, specialist peer worker at Flourish, Australia, and Sarreta Lee, psychiatrist, joining us today. So I think I'll pass over to you, Priscilla, now to talk about how this Fishbowl works.
Thanks, Leanne. So I'm Priscilla. I am the CEO of Being Mental Health Consumers in New South Wales. So our panelists here are going to start by briefly discussing their views about mental health and human rights. And as you can see, there is a spare seat on this panel, which anybody in the audience is able to sit in and join the conversation at any time. And the panelists will be free to come and go whenever they please. So when there is a spare seat, please feel very welcome to come and sit in it and have your say. You might want to add some context before you start speaking. So for example, I'm Priscilla, the CEO of Being, and I'm also a mental health consumer. The discussion will not be facilitated. So we trust you, the attendees, to participate fairly. We invite all people here to express their points of view with sensitivity and with respect to others and their various histories and experiences. Compassionately and respectfully challenging each other's views is how we can grow our worldview and knowledge. Although when doing so, let us be patient and kind to one another, even when our views differ. Also, please practice self-compassion and self-care during this session. We acknowledge it's possible you will hear views or content that you may find distressing or triggering due to the nature of the topic. You're welcome to leave the room or the live stream at any time. Thank you.
I walked straight into that. I think we have been briefed to give a couple of minutes on our views, but like everyone else, I was hoping not to go first, but literally drew the short straw. I was doing a lot of pre-reading about the perspective I would bring and reports that are out at the moment and current, and I kind of figured that the best way to move forward was to phone some people who I really respected and had different views of my own to talk about this as well, so that it wasn't just representative of what I'd been reading and my own thoughts. And I guess starting from the welcome that we got around, it's been a really difficult week for a lot of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It is exhausting and hard, but we do need to acknowledge that although ideally everyone is born with the same human rights, that not everyone receives them. But I think everybody in the room here acknowledges that in some way, just by being here, we're all working towards that common goal. And thank you for participating online or coming in. Interestingly, in some of the pre-information we got, it was talking about the Mental Health Act. And I think there'll be some further discussion on that today, but also around, I'd like to ensure that we're talking about diversity of views, where you were born, the colour of your skin, the socioeconomic background you were born into or currently live in, and also your gender, your sexuality, and acknowledging that the experiences we talk about today in one context may not be the similar for people in other contexts. One of the things I'm most proud of in my role is working with people across New South Wales, but particularly in rural New South Wales. And access to services is something that is spoken about every time we go somewhere, no matter what topic we're talking about. It's always about access and what access looks like in the city compared to having to drive for it or only being able to get it via video link, which we all thought was impossible before COVID, or was like some special thing. And I actually prefer accessing medical care that way now, but that is because I'm quite privileged in the way that I have access to internet. I've got a device and know how to use it and have somebody on the other end who speaks my language when I call up. So I think the fact that this is a starting point and a discussion is really important. And I hope that whatever we speak about today, we can take back into our own lives and our own practice and continue to work on, because it is something I was kind of just overcome by how big of a topic it was. And I really wanted to acknowledge that, because it's not something sometimes when we do these things, it's a really discrete topic and you feel like, oh yeah, I'm all across that and I'm across every little bit of it. But I certainly don't feel like I am. And I'm really looking forward to listening to everybody today.
G'day everyone, my name is Chris Grumley. I'm the specialist peer worker over at Flourish Australia. I've been in the CMO sector for about 10 years on Saturday, actually. So that's awesome. I'm coming today from the perspective of someone with a lived and living experience of mental health, working as a consumer peer worker, as well as being a carer for my wife who has multiple sclerosis, as well as her own mental health journey as well. So a few different sort of perspectives there. I guess my stance and where I'm sort of wanting to speak from today is about more so about someone as a person with a lived experience taking on different roles within their professional life and in their personal life, you know, how that sort of interacts with one another. And, you know, I guess the different challenges and barriers that can even happen when someone is recognized in the professional space as a peer worker and as a lived experience worker, and how there are still a lot of obstacles that can come up for us as a community, how that does affect us, you know, in our experiences within our own lived experience, and that recognition of those connections. Often when we don't see things, you know, the proper appreciation or access, or you know, being able to have a voice in certain rooms, it very much comes back to perhaps the things that we experienced accessing services and going through our own mental health journeys and things like that. And I think that's not recognized as much as it needs to. And I think by, unfortunately, the people that hold a lot of power and that are decision makers are often people who don't have those perspectives to really understand that lasting impact that it can have on people, and not just in their work, but carrying it on. Because I am Chris when I'm at work. I don't wear a professional suit, metaphorically, to work, and I'm you know, utilizing this set of skills. My skill set is me as a person and what I've pulled from my life. So I'm still myself there. So the impact that can happen on me professionally is also happening to me myself. So that's the sort of perspective I'm coming from today. And thank you all for having me.
Hello, can you hear me? I've got a soft voice, and I've also actually made some notes so that I can get into 3 minutes. My name's Sarreta Lee. So last name is Lee, L-E-E, which is common Chinese name. Sarreta is an Italian name. It's just how it is. I am here on behalf of the College of Psychiatrists. I'm a practicing psychiatrist. I actually, on my way here, I was deliberating, and if you'll bear with me, I would also, after this week, just like to acknowledge that we are here on Aboriginal land. I thought about that on the way here, and I thought we can't, every single one of us, but I really do want to acknowledge that, constitutional recognition or not, 65,000 years, this is Aboriginal land. I just want to start with that. So as a psychiatrist of 25 years, I'm on the New South Wales branch, and so I was delegated to come here today. My clinical work is I spend part of my week consulting to youth justice centres in rural and regional New South Wales. I see kids from about 19 all the way down to the age of 10, which is our minimum age of criminal responsibility, 10 years. And more than 95% of the kids I see are Aboriginal, more than 19 out of 20. Yeah. I also consult to Tharawal Aboriginal Medical Service, where I'm part of a metabolic team, and we provide services for diabetes, obesity and metabolic health there. And then I spend the rest of my week in a large hospital in Sydney, where it's a large trauma centre. So we have people who've had serious injury brought to us with trauma. So that's my clinical role. I just thought I'd touch on what is a psychiatrist, because that's often confusing, even for healthcare workers and even for doctors. They ask all the time, what's a psychiatrist, what's a psychologist? So my pathway to psychiatry was standard. I went to med school, and at the end of that, I was a junior doctor, I thought about doing paediatrics, and that's better, isn't it? And at the time, I switched to doing psychiatry as a pathway to child psychiatry. So psychiatrists are medical doctors, and psychiatry is one of the specialties. And psychologists have a different pathway to become clinical experts in mental health, but without that medical degree. And when people think of psychiatrists and psychologists, they think of medications, and that sort of makes sense, doesn't it? Because medications travel through the rest of your body to get to your brain. And so it makes sense that the person who's using medications needs to know about physical health as well. But that's not the only way to treat mental health conditions. And it's only ever one component. And some conditions are much better managed without medications. But there actually are a number, and not a large number, but there are a number of conditions where medication, science has shown us, is the best approach to treatment. And without medication, we're not doing the best for our patients. So that's briefly what that is. I also wanted to touch on that mental health conditions affect at least 30% of the population. In Australia, that's AIHW data, and globally. And taken across the lifespan, it's probably closer to 50%. So between all of us here, really every person in the community will either be a consumer or have a family member or be a carer. I think really this touches on every single person, and whether we're professionals or whatever role we have, in a sense, we're all consumers. That's really important. And it's not two separate groups. You know. The other thing I wanted to touch on was that we know that access to care and services and outcomes are hugely, hugely affected by factors of disadvantage. We know that intersectionality, and that is whether the intersecting factors are financial, culture, language, literacy, disability, social capital and community, families, ability to find a secure attachment. There are so many factors that contribute to disadvantage, and we know that the additive effect of that is greater, like the effect is greater than the sum. I recognise personally I'm lucky and privileged to have accessed the opportunities that I've had. I was born in Australia before the 1967 referendum, and during the period we call now White Australia policy. I wasn't aware of it as a child, but I think it's really important, you know, to acknowledge the intersectional factors that affect all of us here, and to recognise in ourselves, you know, the experience that we have that we can bring to understand that. I can say firsthand that from the outside, we cannot assume to know the experience of others. And we just simply don't know what we don't know. Lastly, just to touch on two factors in equity and access, and these have been touched on. Mental health legislation, and I just want to briefly touch on boundaries. Mental health legislation must be in the interests of consumers. Some mental health conditions present themselves in a way that prevent access to services, just by nature of the condition. Sometimes psychosis, being out of touch with reality, makes it difficult to access care that's needed. But legislation must serve to enable access to treatment and not to prevent access to treatment. So the idea that cannot provide care under the Mental Health Act should not be a reason not to provide care at all. The second factor that I just briefly want to touch on is the question of boundaries and flexibility. Professional boundaries are important, essential. We know that. They're there to protect the consumer. They must always be considered from the perspective of the consumer's interests, not from the practitioner's interests. It's not the same as flexibility and finding a way to respond to the needs of consumers. Yeah, that's what I have to say today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarreta, and to Chris and Jenna. Thank you. and the idea of the fishbowl, I'm wriggling a lot. I'm not a very... These chairs are absolutely curved like the edges of the fishbowl. So we've taken the fishbowl seriously, but these are the worst chairs for me. I don't, yeah, so forgive me wriggling, but I'm not very good at sitting in a chair such as this. I can see right up the back of the room, the big banner, mental health is a universal human right. And it's got 3 poles in it, 3 piers: being seen, being heard, and being connected. And I thought I would use that to frame just some observations while I'm sitting in my fishbowl side bit, that speak to the world that I'm in at the moment, in the world of human rights. And hearing Sarreta, when you were speaking, I was thinking there were 2 elements in what I was thinking. One was the role that mental health practitioners, psychiatrists, psychologists. My daughter is a psychologist. I understand it's very scary having a daughter who's a psychologist, I have to say. But understand the role that clinical professionals play. I also, through working with a wonderful social justice team, First Nations team, have come to appreciate the idea of generational impact on mental health of situations that our First Nations people have experienced. And so when my First Nations colleagues yesterday were in tears, I understood where it was coming from. And I have to say, with my Jewish friends and colleagues, and particularly in the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was born after the cataclysms of 2 world wars and the Holocaust, that the idea of things that trigger my Jewish friends and colleagues are also very present in the mental health space. So there are situations that can form part of your inherited response to situations. There are our wonderful treatment professionals, and then there is the world of law and human rights. And I came into thinking about the being seen, being heard, being connected triptych through some work I led, particularly at the Australian Law Reform Commission on equality, disability and capacity. And I was struck so much by an understanding in the disability area how the world constructs disability around a person rather than a person presenting with a label on them of disability. And so the idea of being seen as both being recognised as that human being, which is what human rights are all about. That first article that Leanne quoted, every human being is free and equal in dignity and rights. That idea of being seen as being human is fundamental. And for many people with disability over the centuries, even that recognition of having rights to be treated equally with others was not something that was assumed, but it had to be hard won. The idea of being heard is so central to all of that world that I was looking at in that capacity inquiry, because so often when it comes to treating people with disability and in the mental health world, it's the being heard is something that is also overridden so quickly by an assumption that I know better, as in, you know, that kind of benevolent paternalism, which comes from a good place, but in terms of its impact on the person, denies to the person their humanity, denies to the person their autonomy, their agency, their control over their lives. So that sense of preservation of autonomy and agency to me is so fundamental in that idea of being heard. And so when the Uluru Statement from the Heart and the referendum, it was essentially about that idea of being heard. It's so fundamental to the human condition to be seen and to be heard, in that sense of being an individual human being who has that access to rights. And the third element is the being connected. And that's, I think, where that recognition of the interrelationship of people, the fundamental importance of communities, and not to be cut off from community is where I think all of the people in this room would understand that dynamic of support. And that work that I did at the Law Reform Commission was all about the idea of support, not taking away decision-making capacity, not making decisions for people, but supporting people, whatever the situation they are in life, whether it's a situation of disability, whether it's a period of challenge in mental health or other conditions, but supporting that person to be connected as a human being with agency, with autonomy, and fundamentally, to return to that first article, with dignity. So respecting someone is the essence of achieving dignity. And that idea of respect plays out in law, it plays out in social policy, and it plays out in the way that we behave to each other. So it's the human condition in which we all have a place to be seen, to be heard, and to play an active role in that idea of connection. So I'll leave it there. And I think at this point, we're supposed to vacate the seats and leave someone else to enjoy these seats. Thank you. Go for it. They're really all right. I'll sit with you while you know, so you're not feeling alone. Okay, thank you.
Let's see if I could sit in the seat. All right. I'll just explain my. Okay, sorry. Yes. My name's Penny Flowers. I am a carer of three adults at home. I'm also working for the New South Wales Mental Health as a carer representative. I feel very privileged to be here today, but I'd like to share a story on my behalf. All right, I'm actually one of those carers that are going through an AAT, the Ministry of Appeals Tribunal, and I feel as if I've been discriminated, as well as my daughter. I'll explain briefly. My daughter has got mental health issues. She's 39 years of age. She has got a severe chronic physical health, and the AAT, the last directive hearing, they expect my daughter to go to bed at 5:30 every evening and not wake up to 6 o'clock in the morning. They expect her also not to have any personal care delivered to her during the day. They only expect one carer, one support person. I did go to my local leader and explain my story to them. I've now got a lawyer on my side to fight her rights. I did tell them in the leader that my daughter does not sit at the back of the yard, sitting in a garden bed, waiting to be fed and watered. My daughter has got an ability, not a disability. So this is my fight, to tell everybody out there that this is what's happening. We've been going through the AAT for 2.5 years, and we've still got no resolution of when it's going to be finished. I did bring a story, but it goes on for about 10 minutes. But I would like to briefly tell you This is something that a friend of mine gave to me, and it's stating my shoes. I'm wearing a pair of shoes. Each day I wear them. Each day I wish they'd feel more comfortable, and some days they do. Some days my shoes hurt so badly that I do not think I can take another step. I get funny looks wearing those shoes. I can tell you in other eyes that they'd be glad that they're not in my shoes and not in theirs. They never talk about my shoes to learn how painful my shoes can be sometimes and might take them and be so uncomfortable. To truly understand these shoes, one must walk in them, but once you put them on, they can never take them off. I now realise that I am not the only one that wears those shoes. There are many pairs in this world. Some people ache daily as they try and walk in them, and some have learned how to walk in them so they don't hurt quite as much. Some have worn those shoes so long that those days will go by before they think about how much they hurt. No parents set out to wear these shoes, yet because of these shoes, I am a stronger person and I will stand up tall. These shoes have given me the strength to face anything. They have made me for who I am. I am a parent who has a child, not just one, but two, with special needs, and I will forever walk in these shoes. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny. Something that Penny was touching on reminded me of the World Health Organization report and understanding the basic human rights of, having a support person or designated support person being able to advocate on your behalf if you are unable to do so, and the importance and the role that carers and families play for people when their mental health either is not at its best or when they need that advocacy that they can't do on their own. So thank you, Penny. That was really beautiful, but it really brought me back to the idea that not everybody has that human right and how important that is. But your family's certainly very lucky to have you.
Yes,
so thank you.
Taken away, trying to take away her human rights as a human being. She lived in 4 group homes over 17 years. And her decision was to come back home, and they're trying to take away her rights of coming back to live. But thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Penny.
Hello. Yes, okay, this works. Thank you so much, Penny, for sharing. I guess I'm a little bit on the other side of 14 years of living experience and working in mental health advocacy, having worked in NDIS space of support coordination and recovery coaching and peer work, and being someone with living experience who accesses and has an NDIS package. I guess I just want to highlight, we understand and we want to preserve the human rights of everyone in Australia and promote that globally. In terms of that delivery, I think it's been highlighted that that isn't happening across the board, and especially in NDIS space. I'm one of the lucky ones who has the knowledge to be able to work hard to advocate for myself and have supports like Penny in my own life who are there to support me to push further when there are roadblocks. I really, really worry for the people and the individuals in this country who do not have those supports and those people fighting for them. because I've seen that abuse, whether it's malevolent or not, it happens. And people trying to get their head around this world of even thinking that they have a right to have access to supports is really saddening, really saddening. So I just want to sort of highlight that how much of a journey it's been for me hasn't been the mental health struggle. It's been trying to get access, like has been discussed. So I really do feel for everyone who doesn't have those supports, and hopefully we can find better ways to help people navigate this world of mental health and human rights.
Thank you. My name's Emily Saval. I'm a member of the Legislative Council, and I'm here today in my own capacity, but as also a government member. The Minister has asked me to convey, the Minister for Mental Health, Rose Jackson, has asked me to convey her apologies and that she hopes the event goes well. I know that the Minister's office are working really well with Being and look forward to continuing that collaboration and the important work that you're doing. On a more personal level, I am someone with lived experience also, and someone that has accessed a lot of mental health supports in my life, including in my younger years. It is concerning to me as now a member of Parliament to hear, you know, although we've made leaps and bounds in some areas we still have a lot to do. And, you know, a couple of those that I want to touch on today are around the seclusion and restraint that we're still seeing in mental health. And that's of real concern to still see those rates. As someone that was subject to seclusion and restraint within my own lived experience, I know the impact that has on an individual, indeed a lifelong impact. So that's something that I think, you know, we certainly as a government and myself as an individual, as part of the government, will really try to champion and change. The second is around the themes of equity and access. And I want to acknowledge my parliamentary colleague, Dr. Amanda Conn, who's also a member of the Upper House, Greens member of the Upper House, who's doing some amazing work in sharing a parliamentary inquiry that we're doing at the moment into the equity and access in community mental health in particular. But it speaks to the overall broader themes that still exist within the sector. And we've certainly heard in a lot of evidence about the difficulties people are still having in having equity and access to the care that they need when they need it. And as someone that lives in a regional area, I am not surprised by the comments around access. It certainly is very much a theme. We've got a lot of work to do, but you know, seeing so many people here in this room today, and I know some of you, and there are many that I don't, but it gives me a lot of hope around this discussion and us being able to further this agenda of mental health as a human right, and making sure we do all that we can to ensure that people's rights are preserved and respected. There are still system failures. I've heard the discussion around the Act, the Mental Health Act, and obviously there's work that needs to be done. We're keenly looking at the results of Victoria. At the moment, they've got their new Mental Health Act, which is showing some real promise in some areas. So that's something I'm really interested in, and then whether that's, you know, another topic of discussion for today. Be very interested to hear people's thoughts. Thank you again for being here today. Thank you to Being and the Australian Human Rights Commission for putting on this really important event. Thanks. Also, it's not too bad. You should come and sit up. It's pretty friendly crowd.
I just wanted to make some comments just with some thoughts that were being brought up before near the start. I think when I really think about the dynamics of like who has a say in, you know, decisions about people with a lived experience and things like that, I think definitely a lot of things are done with good intention. That was the language used before, and I really sincerely believe that. But in most cases, but we have to also recognize that sometimes it isn't. there are sort of business to, sort of occur, and there are a lack of knowledge and education and perspective. And I guess this really highlights the need to have people that do have that experience and that expertise in that conversation, and as an equal voice, and not just as representation or as a seat at the table. It's about having that contribution and that equity and that contribution as well. I feel very privileged to be sitting up here and to be able to provide that in that exact context. So I think education is a really big part that needs to happen, and it needs to happen from the start. We have noticed a lot during the recent referendum that a lot of people that don't have knowledge, or people that don't understand the issues that are occurring for communities, that knowledge will get filled in with something. And we noticed a lot of people had, perspectives on how they chose to vote, and things that filled in by knowledge that may not be coming from a place of evidence, a place of perspective, or with any sort of word from how that actually does affect particular individuals and community. So we have a responsibility to be able to provide that perspective and that information before those things can take place, before people can be steered away, because some people will take particular perspectives that they find comfort in, that they find easy to access, and that they find doesn't make them feel like they're doing something wrong by people. Because what we find is that people don't want to feel like they're wronging other people, and sometimes that actual act is what can cause harm. And I know that's really challenging for people, and no one really wants to hear that. I know I had many conversations over the weekend with people that I know quite well, and it's really challenging to have those conversations, and I found myself quite distressed. But we also need to throw ourselves into those types of conversations to be able to not only challenge others, but challenge ourselves. Know that people in the industry, we can sometimes be in a bit of an echo chamber, which is usually the fastest way into being really stuck into the opinions and perspectives that we have. But I think, we need to really think about not only in those higher places and within inpatient units and all these things happen in little micro sort of situations everywhere. And it's those things that cause that greater impact in those positive and those not so positive ways. So I just want to bring back to that. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name's Andrew Padiacci. I come to you with over 20 years of lived experience of mental health services. I also come to you with the experience of knowing what prison and a forensic mental health setting is firsthand. On top of that perspective, I also come to you from a peer worker role in a forensic setting. For the marginalised and often underrepresented group of people that do come across the forensic services, as you may have seen last night, do have an undeterminate amount of time within a service that does seem not run-of-the-mill by most forensic, by most mental health services. I guess my perspective on where human rights and the dignity or loss of dignity and autonomy when in a system and housed involuntary or as a prisoner feels so unnatural to experience, let alone rebuild from that and then redevelop your autonomy and professional work career from that. Supporting that marginalised group, that underrepresented group, can be very difficult to not want to be seen as someone that is not of a representation of a government employee, but as a support worker first and foremost in the eyes of the people that I do care for. What that means for me is that when situations do become unclear for someone in the system, having walked that system in life and knowing that vulnerability is a part of rebuilding and building that trust and rapport, with the clients that I do, or the consumers that I do care for, really reiterates to me a journey that for me was quite short, but in some respects can be quite a long amount of time for a lot of people. How the human rights aspect of having a or an undetermined amount of time to be held involuntary can have an effect on you mentally cannot be described unless you're living it or have lived that exposure. And to those who work in the system that do care for the professionals that look after and care for the patients in the system, again, are seen as an enemy in the eyes of someone that has, for an example, spent 20 years in prison and then come to a forensic setting and spent up to another 10 years on top of a sentence. So 30 years of a life of no autonomy, no independence, no dignity, no repairable trauma. And that was really highlighted to me joining the service as a peer worker, that the difference a person can make in someone's life is as simple as a conversation. Just like I'm having today with you, that conversation that starts can be the avenue for someone to have a little bit of hope or inspiration that life, even though incarcerated or involuntarily held, isn't going to be one that is a journey that is going to be alone, particularly with peer workers involved in the system. It does show that our inclusion, our representation, and our presence within the justice health and the forensic mental health system, as well as New South Wales Health, is having an impact on people experiencing services in a negative light. And I'm not here to advocate 100% for the employment that I have, but more so the experience that I have as someone who has seen both sides of the perspective and has a full perspective on how services are impactful and also impactful in a negative way. Without the right supports and understanding and navigation, I think anyone experiencing particularly a forensic system, as you may have seen last night, can be distraught to the nth degree, and that would make anyone who witnessed that from the outside not only empathize quite quickly with the person going through a forensic setting particularly, but would also not recognize the whole perspective, where I have been lucky enough to understand that seeing both sides of, funny enough, a fishbowl in a forensic setting, from both a patient perspective and now an employee, having that conduit to explain the intricacies of how a service works to someone that is so fearful of it, it's difficult, and it is meaningful, but it is also purposeful. The idea of having a peer worker such as myself in the system has that instant rapport, that connection with the people that have experienced it much longer than I have, knowing that there is an idea of hope or inspiration that you can provide in someone's darkest hour. And that was impactful for me, having a peer worker in my life shaped the way I looked at the componentry of not just the health system, but the forensic health system. I guess where I'm alluding to with this conversation is the loss of dignity and lack of, not lack of, the sedentary state of patients in the forensic setting at the moment does mean that years, and I'm meaning 5 to 6 years of life, can be just spent waiting for a bed to open up in the community. And that makes it so much harder to rehabilitate, even though you've reached your optimal rehabilitation within a forensic setting, to actually move forward and start your life. You don't get to see your family as often as you like. You don't get to see your friends. You don't get to form any sort of professional or job ties. You don't have any quality of life other than what you know in your controlled surroundings. The way that shapes someone's inability to communicate or articulate their thoughts in what they would like to achieve in life or attempt to achieve in a reasonable amount of time does not get met soon enough. And that, to me, from my view, is a systemic issue, knowing that there is a cohort of people at their optimal rehabilitation levels not being able to progress and actually regress, being held in a system where there is no bed flow. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
If you don't mind, Brett, I'll go before you. Yes, thank you. Hi, my name is Julie Millard. I'm a consultant in mental health, a credentialed mental health nurse. I would say a human rights advocate. But what I'd like to speak to you about just now is I'm a board director and the regional vice president for the Oceania region for the World Federation for Mental Health. The World Federation for Mental Health is a international mental health awareness promotion voluntary organisation with member states from around the world responsible for World Mental Health Day theme. So thank you for highlighting it this morning. But I'm predominantly focused on the Oceania region and have been for the last 4 years as part of my role. So I wanted to just kind of follow up with what was said earlier about the World Health Organization's guidance on mental health, human rights, and legislation that came out last week in Geneva, was launched. And the point I want to raise, it's fantastic because human rights, not only across obviously the Pacific region, but across the world are at such varying levels. And we do have major human rights issues here in Australia. However, when I look at other nations and attend international congresses, I can see how when India talks about the chained mentally ill or people who have to place their family members in sort of wooden boxes for the day while they go out to work because there's no one else to care for them, I am appreciative of the services that we do have in Australia. And but I also am very mindful that there's a lot of nations that do not have human rights legislation. They don't often have mental health acts, and many of them, particularly Pacific Island nations, don't have adequate staffing or resources. Their capital cities will have a hospital with a number of beds, but they don't reach out to all of the communities. And the same as we see here in Australia, where a lot of rural and remote sites also don't have adequate healthcare service provision. Technology is wonderful and telehealth is fantastic, but it doesn't always work. And so that's a bit of a problem. But I suppose I wanted to follow up on your point, I think, in that the World Network of Users and Survivors of Psychiatry have just put out a statement saying how they're opposing the guidance that's come out from the World Health Organization for a couple of reasons. One of them being there was not enough consultation with people with lived experience, and that there was a small amount of consultation, but the final draft has come out without many people looking at it. And their biggest issue, though, was that that the key focus, one of the key focuses is for governments to place the focus on making changes on governments, not on people with lived experience and not on consultation. And so I think the bottom line is I'm saying is we must always be mindful of human rights and what's happening not only in our own homes and our own societies and our own communities, but also for our neighbours as well. Because we understand a lot of people come to Australia to live here and have come from those countries where there's a different human rights issues. So thank you.
My name's Brett Collins. I'm the coordinator for Justice Action. We look after people, particularly in, well, as I said, to a federal attorney general a few weeks ago. We look after the bad and the mad. And he went, whoa, I could see it, but then he laughed. He understood that, in fact, I was identifying with the people who are inside the institutions, and I feel good about them. I feel good about them. They're our friends, and they feel like they're my community. So let me just say, first of all, I come in as a person with lived experience across both prisons and across mental health, as both a consumer and also a carer. So the words of our friend talking about forensic mental health, they strike very deeply with me. We have a man called Saeed Desfoli at the moment in the forensic hospital. He's been there for 20 years, held there indefinitely, and he's an Iranian, and the Iranian government said they'll accept him back straight away as long as he can get to the airport. Oh, right, and he's been there 20 years. He would have spent 3.5 years for what he did. He would have spent 3.5 years. But instead, the lawyer for him then said, I want you to plead not guilty, and insisted on it. And because he was pleaded not guilty on his behalf, he then went ahead and he's now sitting indefinitely inside the forensic hospital, right, instead of spending 3.5 years. Now, he took that issue to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said the lawyer can impose on him the plea that was forced on him, and that means that he's still sitting inside the forensic hospital right now. Now, that's we have a series of people like that. We have another man called Malcolm Baker. Malcolm Baker, well, I'll just quickly name them: Nathan Chetty, Kerry O'Malley, and Michael Riley. Now, these are all people for whom we have been carers. We've taken their cases. We must have had probably 60 cases before the Mental Health Review Tribunal, when we had to argue quite careful arguments about the entitlement for people not to be forcibly injected. So when I see the words mental health is a human right, so I think, hang on, whoever's saying that, do they really understand that health is a threat? That our people cower behind the doors when the mental health, when the nurse comes in or the crisis group comes in and knocks on the door. That's a threat. That's not a pleasure. Kerry O'Malley was frightened and she lay on her bed hoping that person would get away. Now, when health is seen on those terms, that's really serious. So be very careful when you say mental health is a universal right. That's actually missing the point. I come from a health family. My father's a doctor. My brother an eye surgeon. My siblings are also in the health profession as well. I could not conceive of health being a threat. I always thought it in positive terms. And I always thought health was actually an area of goodwill. But now I don't believe so. I see, in fact, so many people, in fact, are not offering goodwill. It's an opportunity for abuse and for management. And we see this all the time. Now, I went into the Long Bay prison hospital, not the forensic hospital, the prison hospital, with 2 assistant commissioners and one of the leaders of the mental health consumer organizations. And we went through that place and talked to the prisoners who were sitting inside the Long Bay prison hospital. And we asked, are you able to refuse your medication? And they put their heads down. Now, that was an appalling situation. If you look at it now, all those people are under what they call a forensic community treatment order, which in fact the Australian psychiatrists say is wrong. In fact, only New South Wales has that ability to order people to be left inside a cell inside the prison department and be treated like a prisoner and also be forcibly injected while they're in there. Only New South Wales does that. Now that has got to stop. And we're looking to the mental health inquiry, and I'm going to see our lovely people with goodwill. Emily, we're so pleased to hear you bring your lived experience into the area. Nobody with lived experience could possibly allow that sort of behaviour to continue. Now we see a lack of goodwill in the area. We see so many. I could not believe at first. I came out as an ex-prisoner back in 1980, and I saw around me all these people around health, and I didn't understand that in fact they were not there for the concern for the health of the prisoner. Now that's harsh. But I didn't understand that the people around there were justifying the money that was being paid into the organizations, and they had to be on the committee purporting to be concerned about the health of prisoners. And then I suddenly realized, I saw that in fact their interests were to make sure that their names were there and their hands were up. As I saw just in the inquiry as well, the same situation. that anyone who's actually is receiving government funds has to be in the inquiry and present themselves. And that is bad. That's really bad. We don't get voices. I didn't hear of any distribution of information to people, for example, in the forensic hospital or inside some of the Morisset and some of the other hospitals where they could have actually explained what it felt like for them and what they would like to say to the inquiry. So first of all, let me say, we would like some changes, and we don't ask for them. I feel angry. I deliberately feel angry because I want to feel like the person who's being forcibly injected or who's hiding under the bed, right, waiting for the health department to come in. Now, health should not be a threat. So I want to make sure I keep that anger up high, because there are a lot of people who are getting benefits and are not offering the sorts of things they could be doing. Some obvious things. First of all, can we expect that the law be abided by? Right? The law is clear. The law on community treatment orders is clear. The only way in which you can actually get an order is if you're at risk of serious harm to yourself or others, and the risk of serious harm is carefully defined by the cases. But in practice, what's happening is the Chief Psychiatrist communique of 2014 wrongly describes what the criteria are. And that is a description to clinicians here in New South Wales. Now, we've identified this, we pointed it out. That's wrong. It doesn't talk, in fact, about the extent of the danger. It doesn't talk about what the case law is. The case law says the risk of serious harm is defined by the case law. It is a risk of life and death, of a rape, another case that's there, and the last one is causing serious psychological damage, which psychological damage is not just distress, it's not financial loss, which are things mentioned inside the communique. We're talking now about causing psychosis is what we're talking about. So that's what we're talking about. So there are very significant criteria which should prevent clinicians from asking for a community treatment order, and should make sure that the tribunals themselves also do not permit those orders to be made. But that's not happening. Now, we call upon consumers to come to us. We'll take another case to the Supreme Court. We don't mind that. We've run 4 cases so far to the Supreme Court, but we don't think we should be sitting by ourselves and doing the work. That's not right. Why should we do the work? We're not funded. What a privilege that is, to be not funded, because it means we can be honest. We don't have the nose in the trough. And we actually, but we think of people like Malcolm Baker, Kerry O'Malley. Kerry O'Malley, a 76-year-old woman, mother of 5, who never hurt anyone in her life. And when they medicated her after she had her first child, and then she went into psychosis. And as a response to the medication, no one cared too much, medicated her, and she came to us through her psychiatrist, who said, could you take the case up? We took her case to the Supreme Court and won. Came to us as an unfunded organisation. Come on. And we've done a series of cases, and where we call upon others to show their goodwill and use the authority they have to do the work they should be doing. If I'm not angry, I'm not properly representing my people. And one more thing I'd like to raise is this, and it's a simple, easy thing. Not hard. We're talking now about access to psychological services for the 12,300 prisoners at the moment in New South Wales. Access to psychological services. Surely that's being given. It is not. It's not. How could you possibly spend $100,000 for every prisoner and for them to come out and 2 years later for more than half of them to reoffend? What hospital could possibly allow that to happen? And that's happening right across Australia. Why? Well, people are not getting access to the services. How can we deliver services? That's easy. At the moment, we won a campaign working with the Community Justice Coalition to get every person in prison in New South Wales access to a computer tablet or a laptop. Currently, in their cells, they have a laptop or a computer or a tablet. That allows them to receive for the first time counsellors from outside. So if they have counsellors from outside, for the first time, they have someone they can trust and who can actually deal with their offending behaviour. Now, we did a very nice interaction with the domestic violence industry And we were able to prove that every year, 500 women and children are unnecessarily brutalized because of prisoners coming in and out without any access to psychological services. 500 women and children, and $110 million lost every year. And that there are figures that were presented by John Dowd, former State Attorney General, and Elizabeth Evatt, former Chief Justice of the Family Court of Australia. Those two people came in behind those figures, and on the back of that, every prisoner in New South Wales now has a computer tablet and a laptop, but no access to psychological services. The whole basis upon which it was won hasn't been carried through. That is disgraceful, disgraceful. So we're looking for easy access to those things. We look for support from the Australian Human Rights Commission. We look for support from other people in the field. And if we don't get it, we want to know why. We want to know why. Thank you.
My name is Mark Orr. I'm the CEO of Flourish Australia, a large community managed organisation. And I want to recognise many of my colleagues who are also from CMOs here in the room, and Dr. Evelina Tadros, our peak CEO. And thanks, Julie, for raising the World Health Organisation and the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights report that was released last week, and absolutely acknowledged if people with lived experience weren't adequately consulted, that's a flaw in the document. But I think it's a good document regardless. I think it raises some really, really important issues around some of the things that we've been talking about today around seclusion, restraint, coercion, forced treatment, and what it talks about. And I think it's maybe a little harsh in some of these things. And I'm sorry, Amanda, one of the things it says there, we need to move away from the reductionist approach of medicine. And I think Professor Crouch's comment around the social model of disability, and now this much bigger focus on human rights, as we've seen in the Disability Royal Commission in its report as well, saying we need to do more than just a social model of disability. We need to stand up for people's rights. So I'm delighted that the World Federation of Mental Health adopted this theme this year. But I don't want us to forget that way ahead in New South Wales theme this year was we all have a role to play. And I think both those things fit very nicely together, that human rights aren't something that are out there. They're something that we all need to be part of. You know, at Flourish, we talk about being part of a human rights movement. And I think all of us in this room probably would sign on to that belief as well. And I'm sure there are many people out in the community, particularly mental health services, that would say the same thing. But it's difficult when you're arguing about human rights and saying these are the really inalienable rights that we have as individuals when we come up against problems with resourcing, problems with legislation, problems with, as Bresh talked about, the interpretation of what some of these things mean. And I think that's the call for us, for me today, is to reflect on those things, to reflect on the Mental Health, Human Rights and Legislation report, which has got support from the Director General of the World Health Organisation and the High Commissioner, and think about what happens here in Australia. And I think it's fantastic that both Emily and Amanda are here as legislators and in the inquiry again, I'm sure we'll be thinking about this issue around what review of legislation do we need to do here in Australia, particularly New South Wales. But I also want to just reflect on the work that Professor Croucher and the Australian Human Rights Commission has been doing in its Free and Equal reports, talking about a Human Rights Act for Australia, something that's bedeviled us for a very long time. And maybe even, if to be a little cheeky, we've got other jurisdictions in Australia and states and territories that have Human Rights Acts, whether it's time to have a Human Rights Act here in New South Wales.
In front of people, because I hate sitting up here at the front. My name's Debbie Locke and I'm a carer. I was a carer from a young age. My mother had mental health. I also have children with mental health. 30 years ago, I could go to any public hospital and turn up with my mother and they would give her a bed immediately. 30 years ago, there was an infrastructure set in due to the size of the population. We have not increased what is needed for our growing population in all areas, but especially in mental health. which has then destroyed the human rights of people of Australia. And that's the bottom line. I worked with Dr. Jean Lanane. She was a doctor at Rosalind Hospital. She was sacked when the Richmond report came out that said institutions for mental health needed to be closed. And she predicted that people would be living under cardboard and they would be in institution. They would be removed from institutions, but they would be put in prison. She was boo-hooed by everyone. They said, that's ridiculous, that'll never happen. Well, here we are in 2023, and how many people in a 20-kilometre radius of this building last night in the cold slept outside because they had mental health? How many women and children slept in cars last night because of domestic violence, because of mental health? That is the largest number of homeless people in Australia at the moment, is women and children from domestic violence. You know, the grounds, all those institutions were on waterways because they didn't let them travel on streets in those days. They took them by water. All those places now are beautiful units, or you've got developers homing around on them. You know, we have a lot of government buildings that are empty. Why aren't they having some put with showers in them and toilets for homeless people with mental health? I still don't understand, even all the old railway buildings, whatever. Why is this not occurring? I know the Fishers of Loaves at Ashfield, they've been trying to set some showers up for people. They put meals out every day. What is going on with the human rights of people? They go, it's their civil libertarian rights not to take medication. They're living on the street. I see them every day, homeless, cold. Is this their human right when they're not mentally capable of caring for themselves, that we as a community are not giving help and care to people that need it? I've noticed lately also in the public hospitals that they've closed the mental health wards for beds, and they're making people with drug and alcohol issues go home and take some Valium. The suicide rates are going through the roof in this country with people with mental health that aren't getting the help they need. And you want to talk human rights issues, we need money in the right places doing the right things. And we've got the NDIA. I have disabled child, severely disabled. So there's people opening service providers everywhere because there is so much money that the service providers are getting. And then that's not money going to the clients. And this is a rapidly increasing problem with the NDIA for the people that can't get, it works great for some, doesn't work great for others. There's people not getting any because they haven't got the mental capacity or the mental health to be able to do this complicated system, or even when they got it, they get manipulated. There was a very disabled person who signed over 40,000 the other day to a service provider, but it was their package. They had the right to do it. They didn't have the help to do it, and there was nothing that could be done about it. What the hell is going on with this? This is government funds. The NDIA is amazing. It is wonderful. It has changed my son's life, but I can see a lot of his peers and a lot of his friends who are being manipulated or are suffering. So, human rights from 30 years ago, we should all be ashamed to be in this room today for what's happened. And everything that Dr. Jean Lanane predicted has occurred. Thank you.
I don't think I need a microphone, so I'm going to speak. Being an ex-teacher. Online. You need it for them. I need it for online. Okay. So I didn't know that. So being an ex-teacher, didn't think I needed a microphone. Anyway, my background is a number of things. One, I'm from an Indigenous tribe, the Jungeti and Dungeti people down my mother's line. My mother was brought down at the age of 1 with 6 others. They were probably stolen generation. So I've had no contact with them at all. And I've been rediscovering things, power in the tribal law, which we'll get to in a moment, when mixed with common law and a particular act of legislation. So if the people who are Indigenous here, how many here? Can we see the other brothers and sisters who are Indigenous here? Oh, I don't know. Okay. I'll talk about that later. Now, also my background is I happen to be the importing agent for the competing supplier against chemical medication in mental health and a lot of other things. This is the field of digital medication, which has been around for near on 50 years, but you probably haven't heard much about it. You've heard about subliminals. They tried to give it some bad press in the 1990s. So I caught their attention being in St. Leonard's. But first of all, let's look at a few things. The only disability in life is a bad attitude. Who would agree with that? I'm going to ask questions, so please ask them questions too. I do a didactic process. The only disability in life is a bad attitude. So do you think she needs medication? No, she's happy. Isn't that all that matters? She's happy. Why does she need medication? Another one, you've probably seen this picture. The only disability in life is a bad attitude. Do you think she needs medication? Rubbish. No, she's happy. So let's start getting to the nub of the matter. Who's familiar with the Mental Health Act? Particular sections of the Mental Health Act. Who's familiar with Section 85 of the Mental Health Act? This is something you need to know. I'm going to go through and then we're going to get to the big one. Administration of excessive or inappropriate drugs. I'll read it out. A medical practitioner must not, in relation to any mental illness or mental condition or suspected mental illness or mental condition, administer or cause to be administered to a person a drug or drugs in a dosage that, having regard to professional standards, is excessive or inappropriate. Who knew that was there? Section 85. Write it down, look it up later on. Get familiar with it. Let's look at, I'll come back to 195 because that's where we're going to really do something. Who's familiar with Section 41 of the Crimes Act? What? Where did you learn about it?
Oh, studying and having lawyers
anyway.
fighting battles all my life.
I learned about these things because in 2015, I established STAG, Sydney Treatment Alternative Advocacy Group, because I noticed there weren't any treatment alternatives floating around. And I wasn't hearing the success stories with chemical medication. Crimes Act, Section 41, using poison to injure or cause distress or pain, using poison, etc., to injure or to cause distress or pain. Does that sound familiar? This is an offence under the Crimes Act. A person is guilty of an offence if the person administers to another person or causes another person to take any poison, intoxicating substance, the side effects and hallucinations, or other destructive or noxious thing. And the person, it's an and the person intends to injure or to cause distress or pain to the other person. What do you think? Can I have some comments on that? Did you know that's in the Crimes Act of New South Wales, 1900, Section 41? What is their defence? What is their defence? I'll tell you what it is. We don't intend to injure or cause distress or pain. But I say, but if you've been doing this for over 2 years, you know you are. Therefore, you are intending to do it. So you don't have an offence, you go to jail and you print that off and start showing it to them. So no, you can't use the second section because you know what happens and you should know that there are treatment alternatives available to people. So we're going to get onto that in a moment. So let's get on to the really good one. Section 68.
Yes.
Who knows it?
Yes.
Great stuff. Now, when we started STAG, Sydney Treatment Alternative Advocacy Group, they said, oh, you want to change the Mental Health Act? I said, no, I'm happy with it as it is. It is fine. I think it's perfect. It is fine in Section 68, those ones I just showed you. Let's go into Section 68. I'm going to tell you what the problem is. I'm going to tell you the solution. It's been there for 13 years and no one's picked it. Oh, okay. Yeah, waving it around. Anyway, principles for care and treatment. A, people with a mental illness or mental disorder should receive the best possible care and treatment in the least restrictive environment, enabling the care and treatment to be effectively given. That's got something to say about constraint and restraint and things, getting locked up. There's There's a section of legislation on it, section 68 of the Mental Health Act. Doesn't that sound supportive of those arguments about restraint and so on? B, people with a mental illness or mental disorder should be provided with timely and high quality treatment and care in accordance with professionally accepted standards. Isn't this good stuff? Yeah. C, the provision of care and treatment should be designed to assist people with a mental illness or mental disorder wherever possible to live, work and participate in the community and not get locked up in seclusion and restraint. Isn't this good stuff? That's a piece of legislation in New South Wales since 2007. D, the prescription of medicine to a person with a mental illness or mental disorder should meet the health needs of the person and should be given only for therapeutic or diagnostic needs and not as a punishment or for the convenience of others to keep quiet or whatever, to shut them up. Isn't that good stuff? Now we get to the important one. This is the one I like, the actionable one. People with a mental illness, oh, you want to learn this off by heart, section 68E. People with a mental illness or mental disorder should be provided with appropriate information about treatment alternatives, and the effects of treatment and be supported to pursue their own recovery. Isn't that good stuff? Who put a hand up? Your hand up if you think that's good stuff.
Yes.
Why isn't it happening? Why isn't it happening? One thing, in these things, you've got to act for yourself. You've got to be a litigant in person. You've got to do it. Don't rely on anyone else. I once used a firm of lawyers, and when I went to court in the Supreme Court, Appeals Court, I found my lawyers were acting for the other side. The other side had two sets of lawyers for acting for them. I was disgusted. I walked out. They'd made up a case that wasn't real. Rubbish. I learned to do it myself. And in 1999, I was the founding president of the Self-Litigants Association here in Sydney. I help people who are litigants in person. I don't run their cases. I will teach you stuff. You will not learn anywhere else. So we have people with a mental illness or mental disorder should be provided with appropriate information about treatment alternatives, and the effects of treatment, and be supported to pursue their own recovery. Now, as I said, I have been since 1988 the importing agent for a range of subliminals, SCWL Midwest Research. Maybe people have heard, maybe haven't. However, I had a fair idea what the treatment alternatives were, as would the directors of the pharmaceutical companies. They would know too. I was the competition. I also knew. I had a fair idea. I had been advertising in 35 different types of nature and health publications, New Age magazines. I had a fair idea what they were. So, noticing these were not being provided, I wondered why. I thought, well, maybe they don't know what they are. So STAG was set up to find out what might these treatment alternatives be. What is actually out there that might be good? We put together 6 lists comprising of about 90 to 100 treatment alternatives for mental health. But some are pastimes, some are hobbies, some. But it comes down to a really good list of about 20, 25. So STAG achieved its first goal, working out what the treatment alternatives might be. We had a meeting with the Department of Mental Health people at the top, and we said, we want to move on to the next stage. The next stage is to narrow it down to about 12, a functional good 12, to work out what are the best 12. That is STAG's current next step, if anyone wants to be involved in the narrowing it down to the 12 of what they're going to be, and say, we have now narrowed it down, because the Department of Health didn't want to do it because they didn't want to get involved. And they told me the problem. We have a whole rump of psychiatrists who won't change. They're like dinosaurs, 2/3 of them. We're all locked up in contracts. We'll get sued for heaps. We don't want to tread on their toes. We don't know what to do with you. We're stuck with these people. They don't want to learn anything. They've got their own ideas. They're on contract. And these contracts seem well written. We're going to come to that in a moment. You're going to be surprised. So, Section 68 requires that STAG put together a number of lists. Here's one done by, that was the one I did, with about 15, 20 things in it. Another one. It's on the back of one of these pictures. Where's it gone? Oh, disappeared. There's another one, which our secretary did. She came up with a whole list as well, did research, came up with a list. So we want to narrow these down. So I thought, why isn't it happening? Can anyone tell me why isn't Section 68 really being complied with? And everyone thinks, oh, it's really being complied with. This is real good. What's the problem?
Resources.
No.
Can I have a crack at answering this?
Yes.
I'd love to answer your question.
I want to know if you get it right.
I was a GP until 6 months ago, and I used to work in regional and rural emergency departments, the kind of emergency department where you've got one doctor and 2 nurses for the whole town. I'm going to say something that's going to make me very unpopular with this group of people in the audience, which is that I've prescribed chemical restraint. And I know that that's not mental health care, that that's not treatment, that that hasn't helped that person get better. I've lost sleep over it and I've felt terrible about it. And no health worker gets up in the morning and goes to work and says, actually, you know what I want to do today is restrain someone against their will. This affects health workers almost as much as it affects people with lived experience and patients who are suffering from that. It's resources, it's absolutely resources. And when you've got someone experiencing a first episode of psychosis who needs to be assessed in hospital because we don't know whether this is a new mental health condition, whether this is a delirium because of meningitis or encephalitis from a liver problem that needs treating, there's a whole range of things that can cause those symptoms and they need to be in hospital. We don't have the things that they need to manage that without chemical restraint. We know that best practice would be to have a clinical nurse consultant and a peer worker and a safe space in the hospital to try to de-escalate someone. We know that best practice would be a safe and quiet space where you can't hear the dinging and the beeping and the medical emergency that's happening next door, but we don't have any of those things. And you have a patient experiencing psychosis who is threatening other patients, who's got delusions of persecution, who thinks that the other patients are trying to hurt them, pulling the curtains down from the ceiling. The only thing we have left in our toolkit is chemical restraint. So it is a problem. I think we all know now in 2023 that it's a problem, but the solutions are so complex. And waving the book at health workers, although I understand how tempting that is, I really do, is not going to change the practice of healthcare workers. And we really have to work with those practitioners on the front line who are brave enough to talk about these things. We had amazing representatives at our parliamentary inquiry yesterday from the Nurses and Midwives Association, from the College of Psychiatrists, from the College of GPs. There are people who want to be part of the solution, and we do need to work with those people.
You try putting loudspeakers in the seclusion room, play deep relaxation, number 21 and number 3, stress control, and watch them come right down. You watch as it reprograms the mind. But anyway.
So just to add to what Amanda has said, I'm Lawrence Mosquito from the Black Dog Institute, and we developed guidelines on how to deal with suicidality and mental health crisis within emergency departments. And when you first became elected, and also Emily, when you first became elected, we came to you to try to relaunch these guidelines. And as a part of that, we did a massive consultation of consumers, carers, and all kinds of healthcare professionals that are working in this space. And this is exactly what we heard from all of these groups. The main issue isn't that healthcare professionals want to use seclusion and restraint, whether chemical or physical. It's because they are themselves constrained by the healthcare system. There aren't enough of them to give the level of care that they want to be giving. And that causes within healthcare professionals what's called moral injury, because like what you described, there is a huge gap between the care that they know is optimal and the care that they're able to give within a constrained system, within a system where there aren't enough of them and there isn't enough funding for them. And so I'd like to thank Amanda and Emily for the work that they're doing within the upper house inquiry to be looking at these issues. And the core issue, one of the core issues, is that there isn't enough funding within the mental health system right now. In New South Wales, we actually spend the least per capita out of any state or territory in Australia. The burden of disease for mental health and mental illness is 13%, and the percentage of mental health funding is 7%. That essentially means we have half the amount of resources to deal with the burden of disease, which is out there. And then when we look at the allocation of it, we don't actually have the right data to be able to figure out where to best allocate these resources that we currently have. And I think part of the problem I've been working in mental health for the last 10 years, actually for being 10 years ago, I did your 20-year anniversary and the branding, by the way. I hope you like the branding. But part of the problem has been because we have such a limited resource within the mental health sector. Wait, just one second. Can I just finish? Because we have such limited resources, each body within the mental health sector has been trying to clutch for whatever is there, that we're fighting for crumbs. But what we want to be doing now is work collectively as a sector to ask for more. We shouldn't be fighting for crumbs. We should be working together to grow the pie and make sure that we have enough for everyone.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to give you a different answer than resources and money. But as for money, I'm going to give you a solution where that's going to come from. And you're in the legislature and you're going to have a little job on your hands. So I say it's not that, it's another piece of legislation, another section of the Act. Who knows which one I am talking about? 195. 195. Who has heard about section 195 that renders section 368 and 105 back to nice guidelines that are neither here nor that the practitioner can consider or not doing anything about? Who's heard of that? Section 195 is designed to render section 68 with all that lovely wording just back to guidelines and not law. I'll read out section 195 to you. Have a listen. It's short, and let's see if you can pick the problem. Mental Health Act 2007, section 195. This is the one designed to knock 368 and 105 on the head and not be law. Role of objects provisions. The provisions of section 368 and 105 are intended to give guidance in the administration of this Act and do not create or confer on any person any right or entitlement enforceable at law. What do you think of that? Disgusting. Now, think, what's the problem? Well, I'll give you the answer. It is illegal. It's illegal. Why? Because it's anti-competitive. See if you can work out what I'm getting at. It's anti-competitive. It is designed to stop treatment alternatives coming into the system. It is designed to maintain a monopoly of chemical medication to the exclusion of the treatment alternatives. And it's designed to protect a thing called a cartel. Have you heard of that? The cartel. And when I say the cartel, who do you think that is? No, it's not the pharmaceutical companies. You think they are, it's not. I'll get back to that in a moment. That's what people think. It's not.
Can I just ask with respect, we have to finish this today at 3:30 and it's 3:33.
Okay, I'll finish it off.
Thank
Section
you.
195 offends since 2010, Section 45 of the Competition and Consumer Act, which knocks Section 195 on the head and returns Section 368 and 105 back to law. And that has been the case since 2010. But nobody seems to have picked it up. I, as a supplier of treatment alternatives, found that I was up against Section 195, but I thought that's anti-competitive under Section 45 and not law, because Commonwealth law overcomes state law. So Section 68 is at law, and that's there to protect the cartel, but it's illegal. And you've got to realise that it's illegal. Therefore, we have a cartel, which is a network. Who's ever heard of Amway and Network 21 and things like that? Amway externalized their marketing system outside. They were inspired by a guy, Gene Rinborg, who started Neutralite. He learned about the cartel and the networking system in pharmaceuticals going back before World War II. We have fifth columns in the state governments, all of them. Yet they do not have capacity to do anything since 2010 because they have been illegal, and all the money that those cartels have been making, the state governments are in a position to pull it all back. Billions and billions and billions of dollars for each state because they didn't have the element of capacity to do anything because Section 45 knocking 195 on the head.
Thank
Just
you.
think about
With respect, can we wind this up, please? We need to wind up this event, everyone. We've got two last speakers here, and then we'll finish with some refreshments. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. My name is Brenda Gatty. I'm the founder and managing director of Women of Color Australia. We're an advocacy organization fighting for racial justice and economic justice as well of women who look like me and sound like me. I have a lived experience of mental health illness, and I'm a carer as well to my son. He is over there. I don't know, Josh, if you want to say hi to everyone. I guess for me, I wanted to just touch on a bit about intersectionality because I think it was raised up by someone in the panel. I'd forgotten who it was. I was born and raised in the Philippines, came here more than 20 years now. And, we're talking about mental health and mental illness. And I look around the room and it's still very, very much from the dominant culture. And so for me, my invitation to everyone is when we talk about mental health illness, let's not forget marginalized and the oppressed people. And for me, it's very important when we talk about intersectionality, it's not about it's not an identity marker. It's not about, it's not you having these multiple identities, but rather about the intersections of race, power, and privilege. So I think we need to be very, very mindful when we talk about intersectionality that we center the most marginalized in our communities. That's all I really wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I want to thank everybody who's attended today and the huge range and diversity of voices and views that we've heard from. I think in this room, we can see that there's an intention and an importance placed by all of us on getting better outcomes, on doing better. I think together, working together, we can do better and we can find a way to hopefully get more resources and to make the most of the resources that we have and maximize the efficiency of those. And importantly, I think from my view as, from the health professional view, to listen to the voices of consumers and to consider what's in the best interests of those that we're here to serve. There's no other way to see it. We've also, I agree with Amanda, she touched on when systems are under stress, everybody runs for cover. Everybody does the best they can with what they have to avoid getting in trouble, to avoid something going wrong. All of these things start to come into play. But really, most importantly, we're here to serve the community. And we need to keep that, I think, front of mind and find a way all together to do that. And as far as possible, where it can be consumer-led, it should be. There are times when there may be other views that, that need to be taken into consideration. And that is just part of the condition, of mental health conditions that, that's just part and parcel of this sort of area. Yeah, so just as, I guess, a plea that we all try to find a way together to make things better and, to push forward and to consider the diversity of, of needs and views.
Thanks for that call. Thanks for that call to action. That was a great way to finish off this event, actually. Thanks everyone for coming along. And please stay in touch with Being and the Human Rights Commission. Thank you.